Welcome to the Decade Podcast, a podcast where we curiously explore holistic sustainability and answers to the question, how on earth can we live together? My name is Melker, and in this episode, I speak with Sofia Lindman. And this episode is for you if you identify as someone who is working. Because Sofia is an expert at the future of work. And in this episode, we get into what that means and what the future holds, how the workplace is changing, how we can work remotely. So if these topics are something that you've been pondering yourself of how to get the best work-life balance going into the future as well, then I highly recommend you stay on for the full episode. And so without further ado, please enjoy this episode. First of all, how are you today, Sofia?
I'm good. The weather is nice. I feel good inside. So yeah, all good. How about you?
I'm great. I'm so excited to have this conversation. We're going to talk about topics today that are very interesting to me, both from a societal level, from like a future perspective, but also I'm very curious about them just for myself personally. So I'm really grateful that you get to be on here and that we can speak together.
Definitely.
But so without burying the lead further, what is it that I mean, you have a title of being a future of work expert, and I want to unpack what does that mean?
Yeah. I've been reflecting on this as well, and I'm gonna try to not take it too far. But how I see it as kind of like we're all walking through life backwards. Like we don't know what's to come. We don't know what the future holds, but we know the past. Like we know what
Mm,
we've been through and our previous experiences. So we're kind of walking through life backwards. And as a future work expert, I by no means have the answers to everything, but I think my approach is then quite the opposite. I'm kind of like I'm also walking, knowing what I've been through, but I'm also kind of sneaking and like trying to like, okay, but these I'm gathering insights from the present moment. So that's including, technological advancements, geographical shifts. Like I'm focusing a lot of Gen Z at the moment, globalization, and other transformative forces, like even imagination that are shaping tomorrow's workplace. I'm trying, like with all the pieces of knowledge that I have, trying to predict what lies ahead. I would say.
mm,
But then on a day-to-day basis, what I do is helping and guiding and advising companies and how to create a workplace where people can thrive, essentially, and a more humanized
mm.
workplace.
Yeah, and those questions are super relevant and super interesting to find that balance and to find those structures so that we can have thriving lives while also being productive. So
Mm.
we'll definitely get into that, but I'm very curious to just hear the background of like how do you become this? This is not a university degree that you studied. Like, how did
Sure.
you come into this field of work and expertise?
Yeah, so it's actually started by me living it to the fullest extent. Since I joined the labor markets when I was like 17, 18, I always questioned how things were. So the 9 to 5 concept, or the concept of going into an office, I never understood it. And always thought that there was another way to it. So instead of applying for jobs, I started my own company at the age of 17. So I always questioned how things were done. And I always loved traveling and having flexibility in terms of where and when I work. And I decided to create that life for myself, or at least try to create that life for myself. So I think, it started with me kind of experimenting and seeing if I can create a path for myself that feels authentic to me. And then
Mm,
that kind of had a snowball effect. So this was pre-corona, where not a lot of people like we weren't really talking about flexibility. We weren't really talking about, especially geographical flexibility. And people started looking at my lifestyle and were like, "Oh, like, oh, can you work like this?" Like it was an eye-opening thing for a
Mm,
lot of people, and it gained traction and interest. And then I started speaking on podcasts or on stages, and then that turned into a TED talk on the future work, and then again snowball effect. Then in companies were like, okay, but she seems to know how to do this remote thing, and then Corona hit, and that then like it was booming, and that's kind of how it started, really, very organically, to be honest.
yeah, that's a good way to gain expertise. I've always had um, a preference of learning by doing. So that you get this type of expertise by living it
Sure.
and being actively in some sort of like your own target group is very interesting, and I think that's a great way to learn. Um, so currently, just tell us what you are and how you are working right now.
Right now, I am working from Cape Town, so I'm still embracing geographical flexibility. So Cape Town is my home base, and then Stockholm is, I would say, my second home base.
Hmm.
And I used to travel a lot. I was also in my early 20s, so it was more of like that eagerness to just explore the world and experience new cultures and seeing new things. And yeah, as of now, my way of working is yeah, from Cape Town. And also now, so I'm doing freelance, and I have my own company, so I don't really go into an office at the moment. I don't work on set
Mm.
times, which also requires a lot of discipline, of course. So it's not for everyone, but it's for me. I feel happy doing it, so that's the most important thing.
Mm, nice. And these companies and organizations that you're are helping and like get them closer to how do we create workplaces where people thrive. Um, what are like some of the common challenges or things that I
Sure.
mean, maybe it's mostly Swedish companies in this context that we're talking about. What challenges are they facing that they want your help with?
The main challenges lately has been your generational differences. So a lot of companies have come to me to try to figure out Gen Z and how they think, and there's some preconceptions about them being lazy or entitled, and so we're kind of unwrapping that package. And also, a lot of companies, especially big enterprise companies that historically had an easy time to attract talents. So like they rely on their powerful brands in order to attract
Mm,
talents. And we can see a shift where big corporations are attracting less talents because these talents are going to like their expectations and what they want in a workplace has changed. So they're looking for a company that presents a sense of purpose, that are like people want to represent a company that stands for good things. And startups, for example, where there's uh, like generally more flexibility, so that we can see a shift in the way people think and the way people want to work and what kind of employer they're attracted to. So if you look at a job board, for example, or like a job posting, the perks that we used to highlight back in the day were maybe, oh, like free breakfast on Fridays, like a ping pong table, woo. And then now that may looks like that's less interesting and more like, okay, but what kind of people will I work with? Like, how is my manager? What kind of freedom do I have? Is there any work life balance? So like people are looking for different things. And
mm,
yeah, so that's really that's mostly the kind of questions that I get, so I would say, and how to meet these new
mm.
expectations.
And I mean, there's so many factors that play into this. and I'm just gonna try to unpack how I'm thinking. Where, like, I just realized a few months ago that I'm actually part of Gen Z, so I guess I'm the group there as
See?
well. But just my thinking of how things have changed in a generation, of like the circumstances that we are in. Like, just the technological advancements are huge, so the opportunities to do remote work indoors are like completely unprecedented in terms of what they were before. So of course there's a change in how to meet that and how we actually conduct our day-to-day work. But also I think there's many like environmental, both social and environmental factors that play into this, where my generation will not have the same like work careers maybe as the older generation had, where we earn more and more money and then we cash out and or live on retirement. At least in my thinking is almost a bit more existential, like seeing all that, the things that are happening, and seeing that, well, I'm living in good years right now. I don't know what the future holds. It's very uncertain. I can't predict that I'm just gonna save my fundings and then have this certainty in front of me. So maybe I want to really value the time that I have right now, so I don't uh, like just trade money for time.
Mm.
And I think those types of questions are coming up very highly on, again, agendas of my generation. And I think I wonder here as well, when we have these shifted preferences in how we work, is that kind of related to the quality and output of a work? Or like, because I imagine that is what companies are fearful of, that you say like Gen Z is perceived as being lazy.
Mm.
Um, how, like, is there any facts of how it actually looks? What are the factors at play here?
I think it's super interesting that you touched on that, and it's something that I reflected on a lot as well. And because usually the way the previous generations have navigated, their professional career, you can almost see it as like the three stages of life. The first stage is like you go to school, and you prepare for that future career of yours, and then you may go to a university or a college, get a degree, and then once you have that degree, you're on the second stage, which is building your career and potentially joining like a centralized organization where you climb the ladder, like you touched on, like getting more and more salary and getting more of a senior title and position and gaining more influence within that company, and then you reach that top, which is pension, hopefully. So that's the third stage. But the problem with this third stage is that we may not have the help anymore. We may not have the opportunity to actually enjoy this money. And it's kind of like this dingling carrot in front of us of like chasing this thing that never really ever happens. So a lot of, I mean, if you're lucky to enter this third stage of life, you may not even have the opportunity to actually fully enjoy it. And I think,
Mhm.
especially with Gen Z, I don't have like a proper answer to it, but my reflections, I think there's a lot of factors that plays a pivotal role in that. And I think digitalization is a massive one. Like Gen Z is the first generation that kind of been raised by like the internet. So we had access to information that our previous generations didn't. And we had a more globalized perspective. Like we kind of have access to an entire world at the same time, and no generation has ever had that before. And what does
Mm.
that do to yeah, like the way you view life, but also your professional career? And then on top of that, a lot of global changes. I mean, we uh, um, environmental changes, the climate change. We see war. We see a lot of suffering, and then Corona happened that forced us into looking at work in a different way. So I think all these combinations and factors played a big part in like how people approach work nowadays, especially the younger generation. And even after Corona, layoffs it became a big thing, and especially within tech. And I think people realized how replaceable they are and wanted to take their career in their own hands. So we see a boom in like the freelance market, for example, and the gig economy rate rise a lot after Corona, because people realized like, oh, I can actually I can take ownership over my own career, and the illusion of security that we get from an employer isn't really real. Um, so
Hmm.
I think I don't know if that answers the question, but it's yeah, my
It's food
reflections.
for thought for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, it's very interesting to hear. And one thing that I didn't really even touch upon in my view was also like with these factors shifting in the outer world. Um, I mean, maybe I am in a bubble where I'm working within sustainability and meet lots of people who are very purpose driven. But my sense is that those big questions are coming more into play in general for Gen Z. Like, okay, if the future is changing and the circumstances are changing so rapidly,
Mm.
I don't know what 10 years ahead looks like. That I feel like there's a will to spend time doing something meaningful. You want to get paid, but you still uh, want to be of contribution towards something. And I think, is this something that you're talking about with employers? And because I know that we are talking about it with our clients as sustainability consultants, that asking them, okay, so what is your role as a company in a sustainable vision? Because that vision is what you're selling towards future employees.
Mm. Absolutely. And I think, I mean, research clearly shows there was a survey from LinkedIn, I think 2 years back, showing that I think it was like 82 or 87% of Gen Z workers choose an employer based on who best aligns with their personal values. So for companies that lack a clear purpose or a clear mission that are guiding the organization towards a common goal, it will be more difficult to retain and attract Gen Z talents. And generally speaking, like when you look at the data, it clearly shows that Gen Z wants to work for a company with a bigger mission. So profit before people isn't it anymore, and there's a lot.
Mm,
There's a different climate in terms of how we perceive employees. And I think an interesting factor here is to look at B2C companies, and especially with the rise of social media. So we can see a lot of B2C companies getting a lot of shit for not taking responsibility or getting called out when something is greenwashed or isn't handled properly. And I think generally because of social media and because of the knowledge that Gen Z possess and have, that the bullshit radar is higher, and people want to be proud of what they'll be representing, what kind of brand they'll be representing, than just simply working for a title or a position. So I think it's interesting to see that shift of a lot of big brands getting called out for not doing uh, things in a proper way. I don't know if that answers the question, but I thought about that because I think it's super interesting with it's kind of like the cool kids in school where it's like, oh, but no one's really
mm.
questioning them because they're the cool kids. But now a new generation is coming up and be like, oh, but that's actually not cool. Like you shouldn't scream at that little girl in fourth grade. Like it's really interesting to see because they're getting called out in a way that they haven't been before.
Mm. Yeah, that's interesting. Uh, so many factors here, but for you personally, I'm curious to hear because one big topic in my circles and of people in similar ages to me who both feel ambition. We want to go something, we want somewhere we want to develop, um, but we also want to have thriving lives in the everyday life, so that we don't feel like, okay, I'm doing my week, then I feel exhausted, take the weekend to recover, go back, do the same thing, and get stuck in a sort of rat race. Like,
Mm.
at least that's on my top 5 of biggest fears in life. How are you personally making sure that you have balance between private life and work life and ambition and also just living?
That's a good question. I wouldn't say that I've mastered it, but it's something that's very high on my list. And I think first of all is really deciding what kind of career you want and what you, because you can, like from an early age, I realized that I don't want to give up my quality of living. And what I mean with quality of living, it's like that's why I live in Cape Town. I love nature. I love being able to go for a 2-hour walk in the morning. I love to spend time with my friends and with my family, and that's life for me. And I don't want to exchange that for a career that helps me earn a lot of good money. I realized from an early age that I don't want to sacrifice this over a career. So that it made me more intentional with how I chose to navigate the career paths that I've been on, first and foremost. So, like, I said no to opportunities that I knew would result in me sacrificing my quality of life. So that's like the first step. Um, and second step, of course, work can be stressful, and especially working remotely, and especially when you're your own boss. So for me, you have to you have to be dedicated. You also have to set up a proper routine. So for me, especially when you don't have like certain hours you work, and then you leave the office, and then you kind of leave work at that physical space. So for me, work is in my laptop. So like it's so easy
Hmm.
to, like, I literally just have to turn on the screen and then I'm back on it. So yeah, being really, uh, yeah, being firm with myself and my boundaries that I set. So make sure that um, I don't look at my laptop after 6 p.m. I make sure to take breaks, and I learn more about my cycle as well of when I'm the most productive versus when I'm the least productive. So not pushing myself when I'm not in a space of performing. So getting to know my cycle, and I like personally, I know that I'm the most productive in the morning. So like I make sure to do a lot of heavy work in the morning and then do meetings in the afternoon. So knowing yourself and also being, um, yeah, knowing yourself, and then also setting those boundaries and sticking to those boundaries. But it's not an easy. I think we're all still learning and growing, and realizing a lot about ourselves and what makes us feel like we can keep that balance between it all.
Yeah, for sure. And in my experience, I feel like um, work, and especially sometimes demanding work, is really requiring me to ask myself those questions of, okay, how can I actually um, set my own stage in a way so that I can be both productive to feel well. It sets those questions into play, and I
Sure.
think that is highly relevant. And also, one thing that is being about a lot, and maybe it's specifically in me doing consultancy work, but I think probably most people listening to this probably have an hourly salary, and I think when we realize more and more about how we personally work, so that your morning hour is not going to be the same as your afternoon hour, that there's, of course, we have like a reductionist mechanism for, okay, how do we value workers? But I think more and more people are realizing that just how limited that perspective on time equals output
Mm,
actually is.
yes, definitely. I think the concept of 9 to 5 was born during the Industrial Revolution, and that was a very different time from the time we're living now. But we're still holding on to that concept of time in exchange for money and go into a specific physical space. Like it's kind of like getting a job can mean that you have to change your whole life because you need to be relocated to that specific office, which means that you need to move to a new city and create a new life at this at this geographical spot. So it doesn't, for me at least, it doesn't make sense that we're holding on to a concept that made sense during those times, and that was really different times. And work looks very different now. And I think that's the thing that, especially speaking to a lot of companies, I think a lot of leaders are scared to lose control because a lot of leaders back in the day so this came up a lot during Corona. It's like leadership based on control instead of trust.
Mm.
And when Corona hits and people were forced to work from home, they realized they need to change it. They needed to change their leadership style because they can't. It doesn't, just by you showing up in the office doesn't mean that you're actually working. So it's like an illusion of having control over these people and knowing that they're productive. But someone can sit 8 hours in an office and do nothing, and you can work 4 hours from home and do everything. So I think we should look at performance and outcome and results way more than time, because time, it doesn't make sense why we're measuring based on time when the thing that we want in the end is the actual result. And then how you choose to get there from A to B, I think it's up to the individual or the team or the manager and the employee. Uh, but I just, yeah, for me, it doesn't make any sense, honestly. And I think that's going to change. And I think it's already changing, to be honest.
Mm. Yeah. I just thought to myself that I think we maybe should acknowledge as well, like the privilege we have of even being able to ask these questions. I realize that this is not maybe what the majority of the world's population is able to do. But with that said, I think it's still really relevant to think that, I mean, we in Sweden, for example, have really good worker rights in general. So that's, of course, we want to ask these type of questions, like to drive forward, like how can we humanize the work and see what the future might look like. And in that regard, I'm very curious to hear about if we do go over to maybe not having a simplistic measure of time equals output, but rather that the individual takes more responsibility on, okay, I have this thing to do, I'm going to do it, and then I'm going to take care of my own health so that I don't become too stressed out or burned out, so that I can do good work tomorrow, the next month, and so on. If that if it goes in that direction, what do you think, what qualities are kind of required or need to be fostered in the one doing the work, the individual who is working in a more trust-based system?
Mm. Really interesting that you touched on that. I think the World Economic Forum released a list of important skills for the future, and I don't remember exactly all of the skills that were pointed out, but one thing that is crucial and it's going to be even more crucial is self leadership. So I think leaders um, will have to find a way to teach their team how to lead themselves. And again, I don't think there's a like moving into this direction. I don't think it necessarily means that like all responsibility on the individual, but more so like how can we change our leadership style? How can we change our processes? How can we change our policies to make sure that we can support these people, even if they work from afar, even if it's asynchronous, even if our organization is more decentralized and more people have the opportunity to speak up. So I think, yeah, looking at it from a holistic view, and also, um, yeah, I think, yeah, I think self leadership and again, like when we talk about the office, especially someone like me who I've never really worked in an office, so to be honest. Like, I don't even know how that feels like. And a lot of people come up to me and they think that I'm like pro or against. I'm like, against the office. I think everyone should do this, the thing that I'm doing, and that's not correct. Some people love a clear framework and they love to have that routine of I'm going to this place. I have my place, like I have my seat at the office, and I have someone telling me what to do. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think what we should look at instead is more like looking more at the individual more than like a one size fits all. Because some people do prefer to go into an office, check off their hours, and then leave. And there's companies that are, I think, yeah, I think companies just needs to sit down and be clear on what their identity is and what kind of company culture they want. So again, it's nothing wrong with wanting people to come into the office, but bear in mind you're gonna lose a lot of great talents out there because study shows that a lot of people want majority of workers want flexibility. So that's like the price you have to pay. Not saying there's any right or wrong. Um, and then some people do prefer to have more of an autonomous way of working, and that requires different skills, self leadership, for example, and taking ownership over your work. And that's nothing wrong with that either. And I think a lot of companies, especially post Corona, it's been allowing flexible work. A lot of we could see in studies that a lot of people from Stockholm and Sweden, they moved away from the cities and to the countryside more than ever. So people migrated out of the big cities, and same with offices. A lot of people left their offices and decided to create an online office. So we can see the shifts and changes, but I think there's still a confusion in terms of how do we make it work, like hybrid or remote, if that's the way we want to go, or is that the way we're gonna go? So there's a lot of confusion around like what do we stand for, what do we want, and why do we want that, and are we listening to our employees while making that decision?
Hmm. So interesting. Um, I want to shift us over slightly to also back again to your experiences, and because I mean you've been living with remote work for many years and kind of gotten to know that, and so I want to get at like some of your lessons, some of your learnings of do's and don'ts. But I think it would be really interesting just to hear initially like what have been some of the most weird or funny places or funny circumstances that you have found yourself in while working remotely.
A lot. So many. I usually say when people ask that I took flexibility and I ran with it. Like I took it to the extreme
Yeah.
of the extreme. I think just that's kind of how I am as a person, I guess. And I I started out again, I was in my early 20s and I was so eager to explore the world. I was like my grandpa was a world traveler. Like he jumped on a cargo ship and traveled to um, Central America and South America. And so I had that travel, like it's like a travel gene that I got as well, or the travel bug, the permanent travel
Mm.
bug. So first, the first couple of years, yeah, I ended up in a lot of places, situations. I mean, I traveled to Kazakhstan by train, and Kazakhstan is one of the biggest countries in the world, and it's one of the most fascinating countries in the world, I would say. That was a really interesting moment, and I ended up in a remote village in the southern part of Kazakhstan, and I didn't have any signal. It was a weekend, so, like, yeah, I didn't have any news that I had to attend, but it was a funny moment because I was in the middle of nowhere, no one spoke English, and I was sitting at this bonfire next to these, like, 10 Kazakh women, not being able to actually communicate with them, and then I had to work in the evening, so I went back into the room to work, and
Mm.
it just, like, struck me. I was like, "This is a very interest" normally people may go to their work, whether that is an office or another kind of situation. But it was just like, I was like, this is so weird. I was like, is this my life? Like it was it was a
Yeah.
really strange moment because I had a lot of those. Like, yeah, waking up next to a cow in Sri Lanka and then like going to the office being chased by a monkey. Like it's been fun.
Yeah. Many stories to tell the grandkids when that comes around.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's so much fun. So in terms of, we have touched upon it a little bit, but I want to hear you talk more to it. It's like, um, what are some tips now if we just want to advise other people who have maybe similar travel bugs that you do, want to experience the world, want to try out remote work, like even if that is working from your from the countryside or if that is working from Kazakhstan, what is something that they need to be aware of? What are some do's and don'ts?
I think I would say just do it because you don't know until you've done it if it's the right fit or not. I would say that's the first thing. We can also dive into like how to get a remote job, but in terms of living the remote or like location independent lifestyle, especially with the rise of social media and post corona, it became more normalized to work remotely. And we see these travel influencers and digital nomad, and it looks very pretty. And it's a filtered way of, y- perceiving someone's reality. It's very one dimensional and it's not the truth. So I think a lot of people get influenced by the accounts that we consume on socials and want to get that lifestyle because it looks nice and pretty and it looks fun and you work from a beach, and that's
Mm,
far from the reality. That can be a part of the reality, but it's far from the truth. Um, so I think, yeah, but I also think that go for it if that's something that gives you like the butterflies in the stomach, and if it's something that makes you feel alive, like you want to live a life that sparks your soul. That's my motto, at least. And if something that you want to try out, life is too short to not try. But I do think, again, like the cons is there's a lot of responsibility on you. And even if you work for a company, you're still kind of your own boss. Like no one will tell you what to do and when to do it. That's on you to perform. And that requires a lot of discipline. And especially if you end up going to a location with a beach and palm trees, it's very tempting to not be on your laptop and go to the beach and enjoy it, especially if it's a place where a lot of tourists go and you see people going surfing in the morning. So it's a lot of discipline of, because then if you work, I mean, yeah, I'm from Stockholm and the winters are rough and hard and there's a lot to do during those like 9 months of the year. So it's easy to do it and you're probably with your coworkers and you're working on the same project, you're working for the same mission. So you have that social network and aspect to it. But working alone requires a lot from you. It's harder to work if you sit in front of a beach than if you sit in front of a gray sky in an office together with these people that again you work together for the specific mission. So it's not the way it seems, but I think if it speaks to you, I think you should try it.
mm. It's so funny. Like, I think many people maybe have not tried working from the beach, but I think many people can sense what you're speaking about just from having been at home and worked during the pandemic or now afterwards with flexible work, that it can be the most productive thing ever to be at home when you get in the zone. But I think many people can resonate as well with, maybe I should stick in some laundry, maybe I should clean the kitchen a bit and those types of things, so that it can become so many distractions, even in an environment that does not have palm trees and surfable waves and those types of things. So I think what you're speaking to, um, determining for yourself, like having both freedom and discipline, I think those go so much hand in hand if you're trying to do something like this, and you uh, can't really have one without the other in the long term.
Yeah. And what's interesting with that, just want to add on, again, that this is my journey, but flexibility and navigating a location independent lifestyle is so much more. Like my story is just one story of how I choose to live my flexible life. A lot of people have a very different view of what flexibility means to them. And you can be a single mom at home and you can't get the work life balance. It's like you can't get that puzzle to go together. And what flexible work can allows then is to be more autonomous in your days and allowing that puzzle to kind of come together beautifully and allowing you to spend more time with your loved ones. And uh, there's so many factors that plays into that. And like you mentioned as well, like some people do prefer to work from home, and some people may not live close to the office. Um, and so flexibility is very personal, I would say, and really depends on the person and the situation. And it sounds very fluffy and superficial when we talk about like the palm trees, but like also that's not why I'm not working remotely to see palm trees every morning. I work remotely because it feels the most authentic to me, and I wanted to find a place in the world that made me feel the most at home. And I never really felt that in Sweden, and I found a place, that happens to be on the opposite. I literally went from the north to the south of the world, and I found it in Cape Town. So it's more just like finding that sense of home, and that could have been anywhere. It
Mm.
just happens to be a little sunnier here. So I think, yeah, again, flexibility is so different depending on who you ask.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. That's great to acknowledge as well. And I know as well that you have experienced many different countries and culture, and I wanted to ask you about this as well. What different views are there on like work, but also want to ask like more broader than that, like how um, work and productivity and those types of things plays a part in the bigger aspects of life. Like what have you seen in the different places you've been in?
Yeah, it really opened my eye in terms of, it's easy to think that whatever world or society you live in, that's the truth, that's the universal truth. And then the more you explore and get exposed to different types of cultures, the more you realize that it's just a subjective view on something. And traveling, I mean, even here in South Africa, the views, I mean, also I think the unemployment rate for youth here, I don't dare to say the number, but I think it's around like 60%. So they face a lot
Hmm.
of very different types of challenges. Like we're extremely privileged, or I am extremely privileged coming from Sweden, and also in terms of work here, for example, it's people would be looking at you strangely if it's a sunny day and it's past 3 p.m. and you're still in the office. The boss would say, like, get your ass out there. It's sunny. You should enjoy the day. And that's not really the case in Sweden, for example. Like you stick to your hours, and it's you work to live more than like work. And then I think generally it's a generalization, but like you work during the week and then you get to enjoy the time you have during the weekend, and then you're back at the Monday again, and you don't really have a social life until Friday, and then Friday comes, and then it's like being in that rat race. But here it's less focus on working hard. I think more like working smart, I would say. But it really does open your eyes in terms of different cultures, regions, and yeah, the way people view work. And like you can, like I was in Sri Lanka for 2 months, like 6 years ago, and people love to take you home for dinner. And these are people that earn, you know, the differences are insane. Like people that really live day by day and don't have a solid paycheck coming in monthly or weekly. people that with way less than you doing way more than you, and being way more generous. And that also opened my eyes a lot to generosity and yeah, the way we view, like, we live in a very individualistic society, especially in the Western world, and then you see these people that have way less than you, just giving like the last piece of food that they have on the table. So it's been a beautiful reminder of yeah, like the privilege, but also how you can give back, I would say.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's a really beautiful thing with seeing different cultures and seeing the world in general, that it can really open up your perspectives. And I've heard the like biggest thinker within, as they call it, the meta crisis of today's world and all the sustainability issues is that um, one aspect of um, today's world is that it's so complex, and we often think that, as you mentioned, that we have what we perceive as our worldview is the world we view that there is. And I think that's quite a dangerous position. But the more you start to understand different worldviews, even if that is like the ones that are most opposed to yours, like even if they have different value sets, I think that's how you kind of develop empathy. That's how you develop more uh, all-encompassing thinking. So I think those skills, if we can say it that way, are going to be super valuable in a global world and where we have to take decisions that are um, taking so many factors into account. So I think that is one thing that traveling and being in different cultures can really provide opportunities for people to see a bigger scope of a worldview, which is a hard word to say, I realize now when I tried to say it many times.
I completely agree.
Um, yeah. But I also want to talk about just shortly that since this is a sustainability podcast, what have been your experiences doing this for a few years of how, if people, if listeners, if I want to do traveling and working or location independent work, um, how can one do that in a very thoughtful way, so as to not do it more unsustainability than necessary? How can one do as little harm and as much good as possible?
Yeah, it's um, it's a topic we should talk more about, truthfully, and it's something that I've been reflecting on a lot over the past couple of years. And like I mentioned, I did travel a lot the first couple of years of being like truly nomadic, and it came to a point where again it's like you said, the combination of like being exposed to different worlds and reflecting on your own behavior and your contribution to the world that we live in, if it's a good contribution or a bad, or like are you feeding the evil or the good. And I always had that in the back of my mind. I think it was a combination of like, oh, like I want to see the world. Like I was so eager. I was like, I want to explore every corner. And then flying happens to be like one of the worst ways in terms of like, yeah, it's bad for the planet. We all know that. So it was like, oh, this thing back in my mind. And I was like, oh, it's not good. But I also like, of course, like it is selfish. And I think I came to a point where I, yeah, I was reflecting on that and wanted to change that, um, both from an environmental perspective, but also for my own sustainability. It's not sustainable, at least not for me, to keep on moving, keep on traveling. And I think at the end, it you gain all these experiences, and then it made me feel a little rootless. I didn't really have roots and a ground to stand on.
Mm.
So yeah, it made me really reflect on the frequency of how often I traveled and also the ways to travel. So I think there's so many options, especially if I mean, Europe is quite easy to travel around if you're from that region, and it's there's a lot of options out there in terms of how you can travel. And I think even from an employer's perspective, like if you look at vacation, like please allow like 2 extra days if your employee decides to take the train to Italy instead of the flight. Like look at the individual's responsibility, but then also from an employee perspective, like how can we allow more sustainability within our company, and make that easier for our employees to make those uh, yeah, make better decisions. But it's definitely I changed the way I live and went from traveling full time to living in one place. So I did a big difference, but then also I'm still from Sweden, so I do go back from time to time. So like there's still an aspect of like I do still take the plane sometimes, but it's gone better. But I think it's an interesting question, especially post Corona, because there's a lot more digital nomads, if you want to call it that, out in the world. A lot more traveling happening, and I think it's something that we should all reflect on and why we're doing it, and how can we also take more responsibility. And even like for me coming to South Africa, it's like how can I make sure to give back to the society. I mean, I'm still a visitor, and like how can I make sure to give back to this land that I'm, visiting, and that that includes everything from like who do I rent the apartment from? Like, is it a local or is it like where do I eat? Who owns the place? Who owns the restaurant that I go to? Like, just reflect more on yeah, the ways that you give back.
Mm. Yeah, I know. I just asked a really big question, and there are so many aspects of these topics that we could go into for hours in so much detail, which one part of me just wants to go, yeah, let's do that. But
Yeah, I'm kind of like we're just getting started.
for
I'm sorry.
yeah, I know. But for this conversation, I think it's about the time that we have. So thank you for today. Enjoy the day in Cape Town then, and I'll try to do the same here in Stockholm.
Thank you. It was an amazing conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sofia.